Hi, this has been an intense last how many hours? It's really nice to share space with everyone here. So thank you for making the trip. Thank you, Thea, for being here. I hope that Odd can I don't know, meet moments like this and be a space where people can come together in different ways. So thank you again. My name is Kate McNamara. I feel like I know many of you here or have just introduced myself to some of you here. For those who don't know me, I run the space Oddken and wear a handful of other hats. This is the inaugural Curatior-In-Dialogue series, which is a new project, thanks to Thea, who's kicking it off, but something that I hope will happen 3 times a year. The idea is to invite a curator nationally to talk about their work, their practice, something that's interesting to them in the moment, outside of an institution with a capital I. Whatever that means and whatever that looks like, that's the invitation. And eventually this will shift into something also where the curator commits to several studio visits with Providence area regional artists. So this is kind of our practice run through and see how it goes. Abby, there's a seat here if you want one.
No pressure.
This is
just right in the front.
I know. Well,
no
I
big
think
deal.
The beauty of these spaces is that it can be as informal or formal as we want it to be. So I hope everyone feels like if there's an urgent question in the audience, I think there's a level of comfort to raise your hand or stand up and ask. Mm-hmm. Thank you, Thea, for being here. I'm going to read
so official.
Thea's official bio.
I'm like read the short one, whichever.
I put the long one in.
Okay.
So Thea is a Filipinx femme curator, writer, and transdisciplinary scholar whose research broadly investigates photography, socially engaged art, and site-specific performance, visual cultures of violence and waste, urban planning and the environment, and grassroots responses to political crises and ecological collapse in and across the Pacific.
I know, it's too much.
No, it's amazing. Across her various research and creative projects, a question that drives Thea's work is, how can socially engaged art and performance move us collectively and individually to work towards more just and livable futures that are anti-capitalist, feminist, and queer? How can art and performance model practices of right relation with other humans and non-human life that might impact how we choose to live in the day-to-day? These are such important, salient questions. So I'm so thrilled to have you here, but I'll give you a little more information. Thea earned a PhD, doctor, in ethnic studies from UC San Diego and was the Chancellor's Postdoctoral Research Associate in Asian American Studies at UIUC from 2015 to 2016. Her research and art writing have been published in outlets including American Quarterly, Acme, an international journal for critical geographies, Verge, Studies in Global Asias, Freeze, and Hyperallergic. Thea co-curated New York Now Home 2023, the inaugural contemporary photography triennial at the Museum of the City of New York, and has curated performance and visual art exhibitions at institutions including Yerba Buena Center for the Arts in San Francisco, the Vashon Gallery in Seattle at Seattle University, and the San Francisco Arts Commission Galleries. Dr. Tagle. Sorry.
That's okay.
Tagle. I feel like I know you so well, and rarely do I refer to you by your last name. My apologies. Dr. Tagle is the Associate Curator of the Bell Gallery and Brown Arts Institute at Brown University. Please join me in welcoming Thea.
Hey, folks, is it easier if I stand? It's like the teacher in me. It's like, let's just, okay, I'll stand, and then if my lower back decides to be 42 or 43, I don't know how old I am, I'll sit at varying moments, but yeah, I'm totally happy to stand and to see y'all. And thanks, Kate, for inviting me and having me. And I really appreciate the opportunity to chat with you all about curation. What does it mean to work with artists at any time and in times of crisis, of which we are continually living through, this not being exceptional or the first time. But an ongoing, state of affairs, What does it mean to support artists materially, politically, socially, culturally in the work that those of us who choose to curate, whether or not you wear the official curator, hat. I don't have a hat. I didn't get a card, but who do this for money or do this for passion or love or all of those things. Whether or not, you're officially or institutionalized as a curator, right? For those of us interested in curation, I do think this is a particularly, not this moment, but this moment is a particularly salient time to be asking questions about why we're doing what we're doing, right? And for who are we doing this work, right? So that was a little bit of a random ramble. I have versions of a talk that I gave at UIUC, but that was one genocide ago and one election ago. So I might refer to it from time to time, but I'll really mostly be speaking off the cuff. And like Kate said, if at any point I am rambling and not making sense, or there's something I'm saying that feels too jargony or whatever, please raise your hand or just wave at me, and happy to stop and clarify and actually just have conversation along the way. And I know we're here together until 7:30, so I'm not planning on taking up all of the space with me talking at you for that entire length of time. I'm hoping I will time myself, or I'll ask you to time me to about 30, 35 minutes or so at max, and then we can I would actually much prefer, again, the teacher in me actually much prefers the open conversation that can come from just sharing out a few of my projects or something. I titled this, whatever this is today, Curating in and through right relation. If folks aren't familiar with the concept of right relation, there's many different kinds of sources, and I'm not trying to bastardize Indigenous studies scholarship, but quite a few Indigenous feminists in particular, as well as Indigenous community organizers from North America, from the United States, as well as in Oceania, right, in Southeast Asia, think through this concept of right relation, right? What does it mean to be an ethical and proper relation built on reciprocity, solidarity, trust, right? Co-complicity rather than a charitable model, right? Of working for an other, right? Who is out there. And it's thinking through relations that we have not only with other humans, right? Who we share similarities or have many differences with, but also in terms of environments, right? Environments of non-human beings. Sentient and less than sentient. Thinking through right relation and what does that mean in terms of curatorial practice has actually been a driving mode of how I came to become a curator, first independent, and then eventually many years later, as of 2 years ago, institutionalized at Brown University. I know this is being recorded. I'm like, Brown University. I'm like, beep, beep. I'm not saying anything, I don't think, that at least my boss, who's not yet in the room, hasn't heard, but I don't know what the institution actually knows about me, and it's better, actually, that they know less. Anyway, so I can do the work. Anyways, that concept of right relation really has, again, this concept of thinking and moving with a kind of ethical practice in relation, in particular, to artists outside of institutions has been the grounding for all of the work I do, both inside classrooms, because I do come to curation as a scholar and as a teacher of ethnic studies, queer studies, and visual studies, working primarily in some very underfunded / now defunct art schools like the San Francisco Art Institute, but also in non-tenure track, and I say that because, precarity, financial and academic precarity, non-tenure track and tenure track positions at R2 state schools, right? So not the flagship well-funded public schools, but the smaller, poorer, browner, working class first-gen cousins at University of Massachusetts, Boston, and University of Washington, Bothell. So in terms of, again, how I've come to thinking through right relation, trying to move through right relation in and through the work I do with artists, in institutions, right, large and small institutions, it really is coming out of a pedagogical practice, out of, at this point, 2 decades of working first with student artists to develop their own projects, especially student artists who were first gen, and artists of color who were having really bad crits, in their art school, of everyone not knowing what to say or saying that everything they made was identity politics, to supporting emerging queer and trans artists, right, who similarly were making work that felt illegible in terms of how the art market or art writers didn't see their art as queer enough or trans enough or radical enough. So sorry if it's a little bit small. There won't be many words. All this says is, right, my background, ethnic studies professor, queer studies professor, that kind of politics, and thinking through actually programming and educational aspects of show making and show building is central to how I curate, right? I don't see those two things as separate. They're deeply integral. And then I don't need to tell you what the writing and stuff is about. You can Google me, and Kate already read my bio, so I'll skip that part and just go straight to talking about the practice and maybe a little bit about how I came to curatorial work. So as Kate mentioned, I first came to doing any kind of more meaningful work with artists through academic and non-academic forms of writing, right? That is often how PhD students and many faculty members still approach what it means to work in the arts, right? We look from afar. Sometimes you'll talk to an artist, most likely not, right? You'll read reviews, you'll do your distance, really critical, theoretical reading, and then you will write your thing, keep it moving. You won't share out the work to the artist directly, and they'll see it if they happen to have a Google search alert, right, on their browser button. And you know, I did that too, mostly because I was scared, scared of contacting artists who I had crushes on from afar. But eventually, you know, thinking about scope, beginning to write in and alongside artists that I had close relationships with, as friends, as community members, in support of their work, because again, there is this ongoing problem, right, of how artists of color in particular, and queer and trans artists of color even more so, are written about, right? And that their work is always back to identity, their work is always about diaspora, migration, food, their mom, everyone's got a mom problem, right? And no one's actually talking about the work, and no one's actually brave enough to say when the work is bad, or when it needs some work, right? Or what else it's in dialogue with outside of a canon, or what it is in dialogue with the canon, because artists of all stripes care about the canon still for some reason, right? So yeah, my practice began to develop first as artists were reaching out to me to be like, hey, can you write for a show catalog that I'm in? Can you, right, at least refer me to another writer that can write about my show? If you can't write about my show for this publication for conflict of interest or whatever it is, can you help me write an artist statement for this grant? And so can you write a letter for my visa application, right? For my artist visa application, and so on and so forth. So the practice really first came, and I never thought of this as in any way, shape, or form leading to curatorial, but it absolutely, right, led to other kinds of opportunities that became more and more entangled, entangled with institutions, entangled in a different kind of way with communities, right? And really helping artists in particular interface with communities that they maybe were commissioned to work with because it seemed, at least on the optics, that they were of that community, but class, right, gender, sexuality meant that they very much were not. Again, I'm trying to move fairly quickly, but I did feel like this is important context, right? Because I do think a lot of us come to curation. The narrative is, right, like you're a gallery, at least I'm in my 40s now. So back in the day, you graduated with an art history degree, right? You sit as a gallery girl and get paid nothing, and you can do that because you have a trust fund or someone else to pay for your life. You move your way up in the ranks. You get an internship at the Whitney or the MoMA or the Brooklyn or the Queens Museum. You're always doing that in New York only, maybe LA, maybe, you know. And then eventually you are a curator, right? And now there's curatorial master's programs and all of the other professionalization. But yeah, that wasn't my path. I wanted to do it, but I couldn't work for nothing in New York City in the year 2003. Anyways, grad school, I went to San Francisco to do dissertation research. I didn't know on what. I didn't get Fulbright money to go to the Philippines like I'd been planning to, and ended up in San Francisco, first doing a more archivally based project on anti-eviction and housing justice movements that the Filipinx American community really spearheaded, because it was them that were being displaced. If you don't know about it, I really encourage folks to find on Canopy or your local library the film The Fall of the I Hotel from 1983, updated again in 2001, and again, I think in 2013. So there's multiple kind of addendums by Curtis Choi, which is a really beautiful poetic documentary about the struggle to save the International Hotel, an SRO inhabited by the 70s by migrant workers, bachelor workers, mostly Filipinx and Chinese American who'd been in the United States working in the fields, right, on the West Coast in particular as migrant laborers, but who had decided to stay in the United States and spend their lives in these buildings. There was a 30-year housing justice movement to save them from being evicted. They were very violently evicted in 2004. Or, I'm sorry, that's not even correct, in 1977. To build a parking lot, because this was in Manila Town, now known as Chinatown, San Francisco, and it was an empty parking lot, not even empty lot, parking lot, an empty lot. They never actually built the parking lot. So it was an empty, abandoned, torn down lot for 30 years until a new housing coalition that did 30 years worth of organizing was able to build new senior housing in that space. All to say, it was a historical project that I was researching, right? And it's specifically about the Asian American movement and the Asian American arts movement that really emerged out of this protracted struggle to save the International Hotel. When I started that project, though, it was 2012 and the start of the second dot-com boom and the rampant, active, continuing displacement of many, many folks of color, not only Latinx, but also still Filipinx all over San Francisco in places like the South of Market. Which brings me to this. I met a now dear friend, Raquel Gutierrez, author of Brown Neon, an incredible book of art writing that you all should read. Raquel is amazing. I met Raquel at a birthday party. Raquel was like, "You're Filipino." I'm like, "Yeah." She's like, "You have a PhD." I'm like, "Not yet." She's like, "Well, I'm, just came here from LACE in LA. I'm running this new pilot program through Yerba Buena Center for the Arts. It's a social practice thing. I didn't know what social practice was. I was like, what is that? Like social service? I don't know." But it was essentially pairing artists with a studio-based practice with one or more community-based organizations in very specific neighborhoods in San Francisco and Oakland to make over the course of 18 months a social practice, right? Socially engaged, community-sited project. And one of the main sites, which is literally in Yerba Buena's backyard, was the South of Market. It's right there in downtown, if you've ever been to downtown San Francisco, where the Moscone Center is, and the, downtown, right? Where the convention center is. That was all formerly another Manila town, and it was raised, and over 3,000 Filipino families were displaced to make Yerba Buena Center. There's still a community, mostly of working class Filipino folks who live there, and Yerba Buena, right, was now doing this new social practice project cited there. Raquel is, again, incredible and not your typical arts worker. She worked with and for communities and artists and not for the institution. Remains a really great model for me. Again, even in thinking through my own curatorial practice, and I'm really glad that she invited me and was the first kind of entryway into doing work, right, in and with an institution. Because it really, again, modeled a way to work in an institution, but not for an institution, right? For 18 months, I served as a scholar in residence to help this artist, Eliza Barrios, who's queer Filipinx, not from the Bay, from San Diego, who is a conceptual artist who performs with the Mail Order Brides collective, and is a video artist in their own right, to have intergenerational conversations with Filipinx elders, as well as teenagers from the South of Market, to share their own experiences of houselessness, policing, being policed and surveilled for things like skateboarding, right, in public places, their ability to access social services, just the stuff of their lives and the frictions between these generations too. They had very different views around the development that was happening in and around Yerba Buena Center at that time. And my translation efforts literally were sometimes English to Filipino and back kinds of translation to, cultural translation from my own background as an organizer and ethnic studies person, to having karaoke parties and making sure there was always really good food, right? And like culturally delicious food like pancit and adobo and things like that, to have people be comfortable. And again, this is the basics. You should always feed people. Thank you for the chocolates and the seltzer. But stuff that is usually overlooked, right, by so many arts institutions, just in setting some basic groundworks of care to make communities, to demonstrate to communities that you're not just there to extract their lives and their stories and their pain from them, to reform the trauma, right? So what ended up happening, it's its own longer story, a chapter of the book if I ever finish writing it. It was projected, there was a video piece, there's like a small screen grab of it, mostly text, taken from the stories that folks shared, and they projected it on the side of an SRO building down 6th Street, which is a very, very busy, very blighted, to use redevelopment language, street in the south of Market, and it was projected every night for about 6 weeks for folks who are coming, especially off the highways, and just driving through the summer with their windows closed because they're scared of the people there, to be able to see. There was 5 or 6 other projects. Julie Tolentino, who's currently performing with her students right now in the Cohen Gallery, was another one of the artists and was paired with the Tenderloin Youth Group. Did really incredible performances with these young people, many of whom were trans and queer unhoused youth. There's an article about that written by Hental Yap that gets to the contradictions of Yerba Buena project and what this was doing, but also how incredible Julie's intervention was, that I encourage folks to look up. That's also why my book chapter isn't written, because a lot of the critiques have been made by Hental, and I'm really happy that they did that work, because I did not. Anyways, working on this project, again, really shifted how I was thinking about my kinds of intervention as a scholar, right? I always thought of my organizing or working with artists as this other thing on the side, and then the serious academic work that I was doing was the writing, right? The historical, archival, close reading. And after that experience, beginning to work more closely with other artists, again, who were not begging me, I'm not that special, but literally asking me to begin to help them develop show concepts, to pitch XYZ, to helping them scour spaces, to realizing I'm actually just the curator of the show and should just lean into that. Has led me 12, 13 years later to this, whatever this is. I have a couple of slides that ask just a few questions. I'll read them out loud because I know it's hard for folks to see the contrast. And these are just some key questions that I think about, again, as I've been curating, and more so with a project I'm going to talk about pretty much right now, that happened during the pandemic, that opened in November, a week either before or a week after the November 2020 elections. And it was also weirdly back at the Yerba Buena Center for the Arts. The addendum to that project, in terms of the social practice project, by the way, was that Raquel, who was amazing, was fired. Her work was too weird and too radical and not feel good enough for the institution. It's fine. She's a best-selling author now, living her life free of working in arts institutions. And that's for another story. Anyways, some questions. Sorry to kind of jump around, but again, key things that I think about as I've been curating all this time, and really again, since 2020, was what is possible when we shift actually existing relations between curators and artists to reflect different ethical and political desires, right? Meaning not just the desire to show or to sell or to have, right, capital accumulation, but desires to make different worlds, imagine different possibilities, perform even in small, fleeting performances, momentary interactions in a gallery or in an outdoor space, right? Other ways of being in relationship that aren't extractive, hierarchical, based in violence, based in misogyny, patriarchy, homophobia, right? I've thought about my work, and I'm talking about it not to try and coin a new term, but as relational curation. Part of this is somewhat of a scholarly intervention into the concept of relational aesthetics. If art nerds know about that term, right? It's pretty old now, it's from the 90s, but it really is thinking through kinds of socially engaged projects. The way it's been written about is very much about blue chip artists who have all of the cultural and financial capital they need to working in and with community writ large, and pretty much everything that's written about relational aesthetics and those kinds of projects really foregrounds artists' relationships to community with no real conversation, and artists' relationships to institutions and how they push against or are complicit with institutions, right, art institutions. But it doesn't actually talk about the on-the-ground ways of being to get a show off the ground in terms of what artists and curators build and do together, right, as co-conspirators inside and outside of institutions. And I'm really interested in the ways that, especially for curators, right, we can begin to imagine ourselves as accomplices and co-conspirators with artists, and not simply, right, being these magical people who give them platforms, right, to speak to the people. It's actually, power is much more complicated than that. So for me, to distill relational curation, I'm interested in how different sets of practices or a constellation of practices can begin to form a notice of care for the artist as a whole being, and not simply as a producer of cultural and economic capital. So that's all to say, right back to that concept of right relation, thinking alongside curators, Indigenous curators like Nancy Mithlow, and Black, right, diasporic curators and artists like Alberta Riddle, Renee Musai, and others who have talked about curatorial care, right? Again, I'm really interested in how different kinds of practices of collaborating, co-conspiring, moving funds secretly, if need be, to artists, even within the structures of very hierarchical arts institutions, right, can begin to, even secretly, dismantle, right, the ways that art is being put up in the world, and the ways, hopefully, that different kind of audiences are able to engage with artists and engage with artworks. Lots of words, essentially, anything I talk about today, and this again is coming from my background as an ethnic studies scholar. I'm really not interested in questions of diversity, decolonization, decolonial, radicality, right? I am deeply committed to those things, right? I want us to dismantle capitalism, and I want this whole thing, right, to collapse. But I'm not interested in doing it in the ways that many universities and art spaces, right, tokenize the presence of Black and Brown folks and Indigenous folks in their galleries as some evidence of making radical change, right? I'm actually, again, interested in these smaller practices that may not even be visible to the outside viewer, but that happen in terms of the relationships between artists and curators and what we do with and for each other, that again can help disrupt, right, how things are made, how exhibitions are made, how exhibitions are experienced. Just some bullet points, again, longer stuff. I'm interested in how, in terms of my own curatorial practice. So these are the kinds of things that I care about and how I try to curate. All the artists that I curate when I am, the originator of the show, are based out of long-term relationships with artists, right? And that are based in, verbalized, mutually agreed upon conversations grounded in mutual aid, solidarity, and right relation, right? Actually talking about what we want to see together, what we're interested in dismantling together. I'm really interested and try to practice collaborative and iterative exhibition building, right? So not ever approaching an artist or even a floor plan with a very set kind of set of expectations of what you're going to make or how it's going to be put up, which sadly, or not sadly, it is how it is. Our preparators get very, very antsy about, but which feels really essential, right? Again, to helping even imagine a different kind of spatial experience, right? Of how people are able to enter and leave spaces. I'm really primarily interested in why it has been really great to work at my institution at the Bell Gallery, is that it has allowed me to better support artists in commissioning new work, right? So as much as possible, commissioning new work that actually compensates artists, not for free, in terms of production fees, in terms of generous artist fees, in terms of payments for every single public program or talk that they do, to realize the work. I'm also thinking about, and again, we can talk about this more in the open dialogue, the other kinds of immaterial, right, not financial or fabrication support, right, that happens and should happen in terms of working in and with artists. So I'll speak about this exhibition in particular. This is just an installation shot of the 2020 version of Afterlife, We Survive, which was at Yerba Buena Center for the Arts in November 2020 through February 2021. In the middle of lockdown in downtown San Francisco, the site and the spaces, really realizing that people needed to rest, right? And wanting to support artists, especially working class artists, artists with young children, right? Artists who are out of income or not getting additional income, artists who lost every and all other exhibition opportunities, right? With no recompensation for work they'd already made, right? Really realizing that they needed to rest and they needed to still be paid for their time, even if they could not make the work that they were being commissioned to make, right? And finding other alternatives to still show work. That was very minimal, right? Artists did not have to fabricate. If new works had to be fabricated, it was at the expense of this institution, and fabricated separately by folks who wanted the work, who could be contracted to make the work. In site and in space, because most of the artists in the show were either disabled and not able to come to the gallery if they were in the Bay Area themselves, and or not in the Bay Area, and I wasn't going to ask them to fly in 2020 to install the work. So that kind of immaterial care, right? Really, again, trying to value people's lives. Crazy. Another key thing, and again, sorry, I'm talking in broad strokes, so it just feels important to lay out for me what is at the core of doing this work, which has been a hard shift. Like, I really deeply miss teaching in the classroom. I miss teaching ethnic studies, especially now. Like, what the fuck am I doing? Sorry. You know, like, I literally trained for this. We talked through the Second Intifada. You know, I've helped students when the Muslim ban passed in Washington State, where there's really large Eritrean Muslim communities. Like, really? We're gonna worry about, like, your frames lining up? You know, what is the point of doing that work if you're not grounding it in something deeper, right? So anyways, I always end up crying when I talk about curatorial ethics. So gross.
It's the best.
Ugh, it's terrible. But it's true, right? Like, I really do think about this stuff, not, again, to be corny, but because this matters to me. Like, again, if I'm not in the classroom, then what is the point? Programming centric to that end. Programming centric and community responsive curation, right? Again, I'm coming out of an education background. It's really important to me. I've been working with student artists forever. I've been building, I started working or being invited to do public programs for folks when I wasn't a curator, right? So programming to me actually is the genesis for many exhibitions and shows, thinking about how the work moves outside of the wall to be in space with people. And any time, whether it's a solo show to a 33-person photo triennial to, in this case, a 17-person show, right? The programs are always deeply integral to who I invite, how the conversation will flow, what those artists bring to the table as educators themselves, formal or informal. And in terms of community responsive, it is thinking about, again, extending different invitations to artists who may or may not have a community-based practice, but who are very much grounded, right, in the kind of ethical living practice that I want to see in the world, and inviting them to maybe take a risk sometimes, right, and step out of their own comfort zone and leave the art world bubble of the proper artist talk, right, to do something else, right, to be in another kind of relation to the public, to different, very specific publics, I should say. And then the last piece, which is hard to do now, I'll say that, since I am now institutionalized at College on the Hill. Yeah, hard to do without getting fired, because they can fire me without a 30 days notice, is really thinking about what it means to be loyal to artists and to communities and not to institutions, right? Like, where do you actually draw the line and pull a project, right? Yeah, is it after you make sure the artist gets all of their money? Usually, if you have to pull out, right? if nothing else, if the art can't be shown in the space because the space is unsuitable or unsafe of a venue for the artist, how do you, right, remain loyal and make sure the artist gets paid for their work? Among other kinds of strategies, I would recommend that for all folks. If you're going to pull out of a show, get your money first. I'll also say one thing, this image, I tend to lead with it a lot because it really, it's doing a lot to do the cultural studies reading of the thing. This exhibition had to be transformed in a matter of 6 weeks. I was given that charge by the institution after they left me on red for 8 months, or 7 months, right? The pandemic was March 2020. This was an open call exhibition that I'd pitched to be in the upstairs gallery space. There were 17 artists, actually more, because many of them were in collectives. Pandemic started like everyone else. No one knew what they were doing or how long the lockdown would be. In August, I got a call from the executive director of something saying, can you put up this show as an all outdoor and online exhibition? We will give you no additional funds and 6 weeks. And we did it. And it was really freaking hard. And there's a long article that shockingly no journal wants to publish because it's institutional critique's a little too critical, maybe, of that. But when it did finally go up, and it did, and it still lives online if folks want to see it, there's a weird 3D walkthrough tour that you can zoom in and out of. Most interesting to me is actually seeing the weird Black Lives Matter signs, banners that were not ours, that the museum put, and the Latinx cleaners in full PPE cleaning on the inside of the glass, because they were the only ones allowed inside the building. Anyways, on the outside, you can see, even though it's full lockdown, people were able, it was held as a public art exhibition so that people walking, living outside, inside, could go and view the work remotely, right? Either online or by socially distanced going outside the building. And of the people that came, that did see it, the people that saw it literally every day were the people who are always at the Yerba Buena Gardens every single day, which are older Filipino men who are hanging outside, smoking cigarettes, playing chess, and hanging out with their buddies. And they're here, still doing that. Some of them are masked, some of them aren't, but they're just living, right? And I didn't make the show for them, but I didn't not make the show for them. Also because I knew it would make some of them deeply uncomfortable to seeing the amount of queerness in front of them. Because, I like trolling my elders. I do. I'm going to move over this. We can actually chat. But again, in terms of thinking holistically about the kind of curatorial practice or the kinds of things that we can mobilize in space, and I'm speaking to the choir here because you're in the most incredible, right, independent space, I would say, in Providence, is when people are asking me, like, how do you get into curation or what's been the most meaningful? Truly the best work I've ever done was at an artist-run space, right, in Seattle called the Alice, that's now defunct. There were 7 of us, most of us non-binary or trans or queer or folks of color. We were all just friends, and we put up shows, and the shows were really freaking good. And we had no money, and we had some grant money, but mostly no money. And a really angel tech donor that would buy like a weird giant piece every once in a while that kept us afloat. And then we paid for it ourselves. But that kind of experimental work, and again, this ethics of care, when you really don't have the money to pay artists, how do you lift each other up? How do you make sure that you're literally lifting up a 1-ton block of cement up a non-ADA compliant flight of stairs to get to a 600 square foot gallery in Georgetown neighborhood of Seattle, right? Y'all literally have to do towels and weird dowels that you rig to go up the stairs. We've shown artists, right, earlier in their careers that are doing really great now, and I'm really proud of that work that we did. On the bottom right is one of us painting over the floor mural made by Grace Rosario Perkins, who's incredible. On the left is a live activation of some warp and weft weaving looms by Indira Allegra, who's based in the Bay Area. And on the right is a video streaming Lordville, which is an experimental documentary about land use and haunting in Lordville, New York, by the incredible Asian American experimental filmmaker Ria Tajiri. The show is talking about Yerba Buena. I'll focus on that, but just to again show that like things are iterative and build up over time. Afterlife, we survive. That's not the right title. The first version was Afterlife, What Remains. It was a little darker, a little more depressing. In the gallery was my first group show in this space. It was 5 artists, primarily Filipinx, Asian diasporic, and indigenous North American artists whose work I felt helped us imagine and think about different relationships to environment, to place, to housing, policing, surveillance, right? Through really experimental modes. Again, no money, but I was able to get some money. And with that some money, I worked in particular to help realize in 3D space work by Super Futures Haunt Collective, who I knew because we were all variously connected to ethnic studies at UC San Diego. But they are 3 future ghosts. They're avatars, 2 Korean diasporic artists, Siri and F. Sam Jung, and the Klamath artist Angie Morel, an ethnic studies scholar. We were in school together, Angie Morel. And their work, these future ghosts haunt places where indigenous folks are or were or are and remain, right? To activate and reactivate those spaces. They're really, really funny, poetic works. And I help them because they've been living mostly on Tumblr. So I help them realize their haunting in 3D installation form, as well as in live performance, which they had never done before. This is a weird, they have their videos, they wanted like some weird high-tech, low-tech thing as like a portal to see one of their hauntings. And we found on Etsy the 1776, what is that, bicentennial commemorative TV, like those tiny TVs. So it has like the Declaration of Independence signatures on the side. And then we taped on it a really crappy iPad that was like plugged in and would die immediately after you unplugged it, and it would just loop their haunting, and that was super fun. And I kind of wanted them to give it to me, but they didn't. That's fine. Supporting the artists. That was their live visitation, haunting the space in the Alice, and it was a really beautiful intervention. It's a staged conversation that you can hear online between Angie's ancestor, who refused to leave when the Klamath tribe was, when their federal recognition was removed in 1974 from, I'm forgetting the town now, sorry, in Oregon. It's a imagined kind of funny conversation between that grandmother and Kiki Soblu, or Princess Angeline, the daughter of Chief Seattle, who similarly refused to leave when, you know, Seattle was annexed and taken from the Duwamish people. And so, yeah, it's this very strange conversation about poop and haunting and giving each other gifts in this speculative space. And it's weird and illegible, and it's meant to be that way. But it was, again, a lovely moment of interaction, right? An opportunity for these artists to move their visitations from Tumblr pictures to being in the world of community. And hopefully it was a chance for folks to feel alongside each other, right? More deeply about how we all, in different ways, unless you're indigenous, right, are occupying land. I'm gonna skip this project. It's a more straightforward social practice project. It closed March 2020, but it's really great. And I, especially now as sanctuary cities are threatened once again with being taken away, I do encourage folks to find ways of taking over public space to remind each other about, yeah, who belongs here. this group, Sanctuary City Project, collective of two based in Bay Area, kind of redact and change kind of slogans around immigration. They deconstruct them and compose them, but more importantly, they run silkscreen workshops for community members, community groups, for people to make their own, and we paste them everywhere. I have bunches. I should have brought them because I don't need this much newsprint in my life. But it was really fantastic to be able to, in their absence, and they weren't there, run those silkscreen workshops with kids and with elders, teaching folks that. And then on the right, part of the project too is they collect new narratives from folks by asking, again, really poetic questions. What would you say to an immigrant? When did you forget you were an immigrant? XYZ, and people respond, and it gets put up around the gallery, and the words that people submit to these invitations do become the body of the next set of posters that's made for the next site. I'll just talk quickly about Afterlife. That first show at the Alice Gallery, 5 artists, $5,000 that I got from the city of Seattle. This was an open call, 17 artists, $25,000 budget that I knew about, because I'm sure there was other things that I did not know about, but I saw a $25,000 budget line that included my own payment, so that was a non-payment for me. And it was an invitation to think really specifically about housing, policing, surveillance, anti-trans, right, laws that were possibly coming on the books, environmental racism in the Bay Area in particular. We were given, again, 6 weeks. So I'm just going to show, so we can actually open up the conversation, some of what manifested. Super Futures Haunt Collective, again, thinking about the long-term relation. I commissioned them as well to make another new piece. Most of these were hybrid new commissions, again, because money is hard. But they did this, which is another, it also exists in an online version as an online zine for an art journal open that I also curated them in. I love them and will always support them as much as possible. This is about beavers, and a beaver that got lost when the state of Idaho airdropped beavers by plane in 1954 to build dams in different places. And they came in parachutes and boxes. You should really look this up on YouTube, it's wild. But they imagined a beaver that supposedly went missing and or died as being renegade and refusing to build the dams that they were dropped to build. Again, thinking about complicity and working together with artists. Again, none of the artists were able to install the work or be there in person for the most part because lockdown, when this was happening, it was we're giving 6 weeks between September and November to transform the show from a gallery show to a public show and an online show. There was a lot of maneuvering and a lot of imagining about how to make this happen that was still in line with the artist's original vision, even if they themselves had, and none of them had any experience in large-scale public artwork. For a group like 50/50 Portable Memories and Rising Seas, it was sort of easier in that it was transforming the materials used to exhibit the work. Normally these prints are like printed on paper, and these are community engaged kind of portraits about sea level rise. I think these were made in Key West out of workshops, and we found an eco-friendly, not vinyl kind of sticky thing, because again, ecology, very important to them, and I think we should all be using this material. It's weird, it kind of melts in the rain for too long, which we found out, because it's not meant to be up for months. I don't know. I should know, but they found it, we bought it, we figured out how to print it, and then they bought it, they printed it. We compensated them for that. They mailed it, and then we stuck it, and then we were like, oh, it's kind of melting, but then there was like extras, so we would just sometimes, yeah. And then on the floor were in the 5 official languages of the city of San Francisco, different questions, inviting people to contribute, again, their own drawings online when they scanned the QR code. So there was still a participatory element in the absence of being able to meet in person. Lots of things were also translated because I curate a lot of new media. That was sort of easier. So you project them really large in space. And then you invite different kinds of interaction. This is Misha Cardenas in Seoul, which is actually an interactive AR game that follows a trans Latinx avatar, Aura, as she is running from wildfires. And this was significant because at the time all of this was happening, there were wildfires all over California. Nisha herself was displaced again and had to move again because of wildfires in Santa Cruz. So, you know, thinking about the cycles of stuff. And she made this when we were both faculty members together in Seattle, and there was fires in Seattle. So you can still play the game if you want to walk through and imagine new trans futures against fire. This is one of the last images. Again, I wish it was easier to see, but it's all online, so you can see it. In terms of not being loyal and really pushing the institution. Again, I was able to do some of these things, and sorry this is elliptical, because I was independent. Like, what are they gonna do, fire me? They're barely paying me. They're not paying me. And they wanted to show because they didn't have anything else to show. And I was like, sure, I'll work for free again for 6 weeks to do all of this labor for you, to have a thing that's a public thing. And so thankfully, the in-house preparator and the in-house curator, both of whom left because that organization is terrible. They left over Gaza, one did, this last May, and how terribly they treated the artists who spoke out for Gaza. One of them, Martin Strickland, he's amazing and still employed in the Bay, so that's great. But they really were amazing co-conspirators with me, and this is part of it, right? Being co-conspirators with artists, being co-conspirators with allies in different positions in the institution, working with their in-house curator, working with their in-house preparator to do things like steal photographic paper and steal very fancy ink to print out very large format images that were meant always to be this size of this is Art 25, Art in the 25th Century, Future Ancestors, Super Futures Haunt Collective, Future Ghosts. They are future ancestors, lots of future things. And their work is all about holding and love and queer entanglement and sensuality and sexuality. And it was really wonderful to have in public space, very femme for femme, lightly to medium, Japanese rope play, right? Visible outside in front of, and non-exploitatively, right? Really showing a kind of tenderness and holding that is possible in different kinds of kink communities that are also adjacent to Yerba Buena Center. The Folsom Street Fair is right behind it. And to be able to do that again at a time when all of us were feeling so disconnected because we were trapped at home. Yeah. We had online programs, again, they're online. We had cute little Zoom calls. This was our opening, our private artist only opening gathering. We just hung out on Zoom and like crushed on each other from afar. That's the online website. So it still lives. Shocked, YBCI hasn't taken it down yet, but it made them look really good. So there it is, if you want to see it and do the tour of it. And again, I've been rambling a bit. Other shows, other things. But for me, that particular experience, which again was immediately after, but not precipitated by because it was already happening, right? The summer of George Floyd protests, the summer of wildfires all up and down the West Coast, the year of lockdown, the year of another election, of another genocidaire, frankly, right? How do you actually cope with crisis? What is actually the thing that you can do, even in your small circle of friends, of artists, right? To shift the needle a little bit, right? Not just in terms of the work that you're putting out there, which is imagining alternative futures and asking others to imagine alongside you, not through a politics of doom, but a politics of community building, world making hope, and actual strategy, right? Some of these other projects, please spend time with them. There's actually interesting strategy about how to disrupt Monsanto seeding machines, for example, in one of them. But yeah, right? How to do that work from within the space that you're in. And it's not meant to be kind of romantic about the work that art can do, but it is meant to just shift and do something different. And most importantly, shift the labor practices. So there's a lot that I'm leaving out, right? In terms of really fighting and using things as a bare minimum, like the wage, WAGE calculator for base bare minimum pay, and going above that as possible, never not paying artists, fully funding fabrication as much as possible. Simple things, not treating your preparators or front of house staff like crap. That sadly in the business of institutional museum work is often forgotten in favor of the bottom line. And I'm not saying anything radical, but it is like in the work that we're doing, we get so caught up sometimes in the final product that we don't actually think about taking care of the people who make the art happen. And I'm really interested in a curatorial practice that has that as its foundation as much as it is about putting up beautiful things for people to love. So I'll stop there, but I did want to just plug seeing how this curatorial relational practice, trying it now that I am institutionalized myself and can't poke in the same way because I can't leave because I need the health insurance, which is pretty good. Next fall, Eric Paul Riege, who's an amazing queer Dene Navajo textile artist, performance artist, I've commissioned him I've invited him and he took up the invitation and is really doing it. He is making a new series of soft sculptures in response to the Dene and Navajo collection in the Haffenreffer Museum of Anthropology at Brown. That anthropology museum was based on stolen or bought Navajo collections. The show is then touring after it leaves Brown to the Henry Art Gallery at the University of Washington, where he has also been invited to respond to the Burke Museum of Anthropology's Dene collection. And some of those works will be exhibited in each of ours. Some of the anthropology works will be in each of ours. And then his new body of work will kind of transform as it moves from here to Seattle. And I really am trying to think through, what does it mean? Yes, we can support the artists, especially financially. Awesome, glad to be taking this Ivy League's money. The community part, the engaged part, the doing this ethically part feels very tricky in this moment. And I also really would love any advice or thoughts or suggestions of communities or things that we can do to invite him, to welcome him to that space, and also to create a different kind of activation of these really incredible objects. In ways that will build community for all of us here in Providence. So I'll just end with that, and here's him in the archive, touching stuff. Thanks.
They, we could just